In this podcast episode, Ben Shapiro discusses the current state of the Washington Post, the shifting political landscape in America, and various other pressing issues, including the war in Ukraine, President Trump's cabinet meeting, and the ongoing cultural debates surrounding gender and identity. Shapiro begins by addressing the Washington Post, which has been owned by Jeff Bezos since 2003. He criticizes the publication for its perceived drift towards radical leftism, claiming it has lost credibility and become a platform for extreme viewpoints. He contrasts the Post's approach with that of the New York Times, which, despite also leaning liberal, has diversified its offerings, such as introducing popular games like Wordle. Shapiro argues that the Washington Post's unwavering commitment to anti-Trump rhetoric and progressive ideology has led to a decline in its readership. Recently, Bezos announced a significant change in the Post's editorial board, stating that the opinion pages would now focus on supporting personal liberties and free markets. Shapiro interprets this as a recognition of the need for a more balanced perspective in the media landscape, suggesting that the Post's previous editorial direction was not sustainable. He emphasizes that Bezos, while not a traditional conservative, is responding to market demands and the shifting political climate in America. Shapiro discusses the emergence of a new political middle in America, which he describes as pro-free market and skeptical of radical leftist ideologies. He argues that this middle ground is characterized by a belief in the American dream and capitalism, while also being cautious about extreme social policies. He notes that this shift has made President Trump appear more right-wing, as the left has moved further away from the center. The podcast also covers President Trump's recent cabinet meeting, where he discussed various issues, including immigration and the bloated federal workforce. Shapiro highlights Trump's commitment to closing the border and his plans to lay off a significant number of executive branch employees. He notes that Trump is focused on reducing government size and inefficiency, which he believes is essential for economic recovery. During the meeting, Trump expressed his disdain for the previous administration's handling of immigration and border security, claiming that they had allowed millions of illegal immigrants into the country. Shapiro points out that Trump's approach is resonating with many Americans who are frustrated with the current state of affairs. Shapiro shifts the conversation to the ongoing war in Ukraine, discussing President Trump's upcoming meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He notes that Trump is focused on securing a deal that would benefit both the U.S. and Ukraine, particularly in terms of accessing Ukraine's mineral wealth. Shapiro emphasizes that Trump is not interested in making security guarantees for Ukraine, suggesting that European nations should take the lead in supporting Ukraine. He also mentions the potential for a peace deal, highlighting the differing expectations between Trump and Zelensky. While Trump is looking for a practical resolution, Zelensky is seeking assurances for Ukraine's future security. Shapiro argues that the U.S. should not bear the brunt of the financial burden in supporting Ukraine, especially when European nations have a larger stake in the conflict. The podcast delves into the cultural debates surrounding gender identity and the implications for women's sports. Shapiro discusses a confrontation between President Trump and the governor of Maine regarding federal funding tied to policies banning men from competing in women's sports. He argues that this issue is emblematic of a broader cultural conflict, with many Americans opposing the inclusion of transgender women in women's sports. Shapiro expresses his belief that the majority of Americans support keeping women's sports fair and competitive, and he criticizes the left for pushing policies that undermine this principle. He suggests that the Trump administration is taking a strong stance on this issue, which could resonate with voters in the upcoming elections. Throughout the podcast, Shapiro critiques the left's handling of various issues, including immigration, education, and cultural identity. He highlights the absurdity of certain leftist narratives, such as the idea that illegal immigrants are essential for future innovation and progress. He points to the recent protests at Barnard College, where students demonstrated in support of pro-Palestinian sentiments while ignoring the violence perpetrated by Hamas. Shapiro argues that the left's inability to confront its own radicals is leading to a cultural decline as institutions like universities become increasingly hostile to traditional values. He emphasizes the need for a more honest and open dialogue about these issues, suggesting that the current political climate is ripe for change.